So again, I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but it's expensive. We've done some calculations. Cost is anywhere between 1.5 million to 3.5 million per mile. And when you calculate that we have approximately 67 miles of above ground utility lines in the city, that works out to 100 million to 234.5 million. It's a hefty chunk of change. So again, the bottom line is the city doesn't have that kind of money sitting around to accomplish community-wide undergrounding. So again, with history, multiple neighborhoods have been interested in utility undergrounding. I don't think any of us like above-ground utility lines. And so back in December of 2000, the City Council, in response to some inquiries from residents, set up a program to try to help. And they set aside $3 million for that program. And the idea was to assist them and help them get it going. The process that they set up had some criteria. And basically, the goal was to protect your money, public funds. That's what we're talking about. And so the financial assistance was available on a first-come, first-served basis. That was to be fair. And only certain types of costs were eligible. It was the public portion, engineering, things like this that benefited everyone. You'll see on the third criteria that funding for private benefit could not count towards this. And then total city assistance couldn't exceed half of the project cost. That was another criteria. And eligible districts were identified by resolution, had to be a minimum size. That's so that you didn't have two homes set up a district. It was for practicality and so that economies of scale could be realized. And then each neighborhood had one opportunity to form an assessment district. That was the last criteria. And that was sort of, again, to protect public monies. The initial engineering is costly. And so the goal was to not embark upon a costly process and get halfway down the road and find out that, wait a second, we didn't really want to do this. We thought we did, but now we don't. And so the city's out the money. And you're out the money. So that's it. So several neighborhoods took advantage of this. You heard Jennifer mention up in South Palm Desert, we had the Highlands neighborhood. We had Silver Spur Ranch. They took advantage of this program, formed assessment districts. And so that $3 million, you saw the costs. It went away fairly quickly. But even though that original money's gone, there's still, neighborhoods still can form assessment districts. And we still do have some limited bond funding available to pay for the public portion of things. And again, I think we're sort of looking at that on a project-by-project basis and also in the interest of fairness, a first-come, first-served basis. So the process. To begin, and you heard Councilmember Jonathan reference this, it's a petition. And Marilee will probably talk a little bit more about this. She and Leslie Miller, who's also here, went around their neighborhood and circulated a petition, got people to sign, and we have set a pretty high bar for that at 70%. They needed to get 70% of the property owners in their neighborhood to sign on to say that, yes, we support this, it's a good idea, we'd like to move forward. And then they submitted that petition to us. Once it's submitted and verified, we can start the next step at the city. So again, it's a democratic process, and the submission of that petition is only the first step. You have Edison, who has to do the project initial design, and then the assessment engineer comes in, looks at the cost and assigns the cost to the property owners based on the benefit that they're going to realize. And then it goes to a vote, and property owners get to say, okay, it's going to cost me this much, is it worth it? And that vote, as Councilmember Jonathan mentioned, is a 50+1. It's actually weighted based on the property and the proportional benefit. It's kind of a complex formula that the assessment engineer does. But the bottom line is that it's democratic and allows those with the most to gain or lose with the largest vote. So not to sound like a broken record, but substantial costs are involved. And so we are setting that initial bar very high. We want to make sure that we're not wasting your money. So if neighbors, if we can get 70% of neighbors to support it, we saw that recently with the Tamarisk and Heliotrope combined proposed district. The council endorsed it and said move forward and authorize the expenditure of the money, about $400,000 to study it. So, and again, bottom line, the city wants to work with property owners. We want to help. We feel we have an established program in place that can work. I think what's happening in the Tamarisk district proves that, and I think the fact that we've had successful assessment districts formed in the past. We've undergrounded over 400 homes through those other neighborhoods, and it's about 101 other properties in the proposed district that's moving through the process right now. And that's it for me, and as Councilmember Jonathan said, we'll be answering questions at the end. I'd like to introduce Marilee Colton, and she's going to talk about the project she's engaged in right now.
Okay, thank you for coming today. I'm glad to see so many people are interested in this subject. When I started going door to door, the first few doors didn't open, which happens. People just aren't home no matter when you go. But the first door that opened, the guy said, I told him who I was, that I lived nearby and what I was doing, handed him my little flyer, and he said, where have you been? I've been waiting for someone to do this. And I think in some neighborhoods, that's exactly what it's going to take, is for someone to do it. My husband and I moved here in March of 2012 from San Rafael. I had no idea that I was going to start this undergrounding district because I had just come from a committee of people in my neighborhood in San Rafael who had started a special assessment district, which was successful, for a landscaping project. So although landscaping and undergrounding are two very different projects, the process to get there, if special assessment district formation is used, is exactly the same. So I'd already done it. I'd been there, I'd sat in city council meetings, I talked to city managers. In fact, the consultant that the city has hired is the same one that was in San Rafael. I don't know if it's the same person, but it was the same company, because very few consultants do this assessment district formation process in California. And so it's not unusual that it be the same one. But I really thought I would never do something like that again, because it's very hard work. It took years and years and years. In fact, in San Rafael, we lost the vote one time. So we went back for another bite at the apple. We already had most of the work done. The engineering study was already finished. So the city up there, just like this one here, was not going to pay for another study. They weren't going to pay to refresh the study. So we did bake sales for 2 years. I mean, it took almost forever, and it was actually a very simple and much less expensive project. Until after we moved here and started to get to know our neighbors, we heard the story from so many of them about the giant fire that was next door to our house and a whole row of palm trees that are now gone, and spot fires that had to be put out 3 blocks away in Canyon Cove. It's called the Exploding Palm Tree Fire by some of my neighbors. And I thought, well, someone must be working on this. This is terrible. I don't like how the lines look either, but I bought the house knowing they were there. I didn't know that this could happen. And so I called David Herman, and he gave me a lot of information about the background that you've just heard today and more. Introduced me to Roland Alden, who hopefully will speak today, as far as what's been done in Palm Desert so far. And when I learned that a special assessment district process was what one had to go through, I got that information, got a petition from the city, started going to door to door in early February 2013. Leslie and I submitted our petitions to the city in April, and they were verified, and we started going forward with the project, except we had to wait until the following February for the city to locate funding. Apparently, people weren't beating down their doors looking to fund special assessment districts, so there wasn't anything in the pipeline at that time, which is a challenge here for Palm Desert. If you want to go door to door in your neighborhood, you really only can do it during the season, because otherwise you won't find people at home, and nobody wants to walk around in August anyway. But the city budget is from July 1 to June 30th. So by the time you submit your petitions in a normal process, early spring, late spring, the city budget for the next year is completely, it's done, it's closed, books are closed. So that's one challenge for the city, actually, is to figure out, and the council, a way to make sure that should they receive and verify petitions at any time of year, can they go ahead and can staff go ahead and present to the council a request to go forward? The other thing about the 70% is really high. If you go on the website, on the web, and you look up undergrounding districts in California, you'll realize that the average is about 65%. And many cities have also got instructional manuals online with a contact person at the city to call, so you're not like floundering around wondering, what do I do next? What's my next step? It tells you step by step, so you don't need to be someone like me who's already done it and know the next step. We are about halfway through, I hope I can say, with the project. The engineering report is the next one to come our way. And then once that is around, it comes around, there's going to be a public meeting, at least one, and maybe more, and there will be a lot of discussion about the results of the engineering report, which decides the total scope of the project and the total cost, and allocates costs to each parcel based on a weighted assessment, and that's what the assessment engineer does. Then we have a vote. Again, this being Palm Desert, it's going to be especially challenging. About 30% of the homes that I visited are not lived in year-round, and most of those are vacant during the summers and are owned by people who don't even live in this state, some not even in this country. So conducting a mail ballot vote here is going to be especially challenging, but I'm sure we're up to it. I think special assessment district formation funding is one way to do it. There are other ways. I think we need to try to think outside of the box a little bit to the extent that we are able. It kind of relies on the fact that you have a neighborhood in the first place, and there are no more gated communities that need undergrounding. There are no more strong HOAs, which are helpful if you're trying to do an undergrounding district, because they've got everybody's name and phone number and they know who owns what. There are no more strong functioning HOAs left in the areas that need to still be undergrounded. So the only thing holding those homes together and those neighbors together is the wires. They don't really have the same community of interest in general that you would find in gated communities or places that have strong homeowners associations. So I think it's going to be a real challenge going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilee, and I hope all your neighbors are thanking you, both of you, for all the hard work you've put into this. And I understand construction hopefully maybe a year or so away, so we'll look forward to that. Well, I'm going to go buy a bottle of champagne to be optimistic. And Marilee mentioned that there are other options and we need to think outside the box, and I completely agree. The current option that's on the table that's been used by several neighborhoods very successfully has been tweaked. It was originally a set district, which made it very difficult, and then it was the policy was modified so that neighborhoods can select their own area. So there's been an attempt to make this option more workable, but there are other options. Most notably, some of you may be familiar with the city of San Diego. They took a citywide undergrounding project, made it a 60. It's expected to be completed in 2066, 60-year project. And the way they're funding it is they've added about a $3 per month charge to their utility tax, so most people can barely feel it. But they struggled with the same issues that we are, such as should everybody pay to underground only one section of the city, given that some people have already paid. For example, some have gone through this process. Okay? Others bought on the north side or after something that was constructed after 1974, as we heard David Herman say. So the cost of their home included the cost of undergrounding the lines. So there's a fairness and equity issue to be overcome. But City San Diego addressed it, and they went ahead and did it that way. Other communities, Rancho Mirage, they paid for it. How? Redevelopment agency funds, RDA funds. You all know, or if you don't, the state took I'd like to say they stole, but they took literally our RDA funds, not just ours, every city. So that funding mechanism is gone. Other cities have borrowed, they've issued bonds and repaid them out of various sources, including the utility tax. Other cities have done sales tax increases dedicated to paying for the undergrounding. That has an interesting aspect because instead of just the residents paying, you've got people from Indio that come shop here in La Quinta and Palm Springs and the entire world. So when they're making a purchase, they would be in part paying. So thinking outside the box, as Marilee said, is good. And that's part of what this process, I hope, will be about. You've been very patient. You've been listening and listening and listening. And as I promised, now it's your turn. We have a microphone out there. David, did you want to just circulate it, or did you want to put it up here? And
I'll be happy to go to whoever has a
okay, just if you have a question, comment, raise your hand. Please try to limit it to 3 minutes just so that we give everybody an opportunity to talk.
My name is Joe Litjens. I live on Goldenrod. And I wanted to ask the utility company, what is the difference between a grid and a district? The reason for it is, 6 years ago, we were without electricity for 42 hours, and the whole street had light, except our house. Later on, about 3 weeks later, in the paper it said there were 71 houses on that grid. If I vote for our street, is our grid included?
So in that circumstance, it sounds like there was a power outage, and there were multiple neighbors around you affected, and when their power was restored, yours was not. And there can be many reasons for that. We recommend when you do have your power out, we want you to call our 800 number and report that your power is out, because there can be various reasons unrelated to the larger outage that your power was out. And when you do so, we can walk you through that process. Maybe it was your circuit breaker, maybe it was something more localized to your property. So, I mean, if you vote for something and the assessment district's formed, that's a whole another issue. The assessment district is separate from the circuit that you're talking about. Your circuit was affected, and your house had a different issue, which you were probably able to address, and eventually you called, hopefully, and we came out and helped you to restore power to just your property. Does that sound right? No. Okay. So I'm not quite understanding how your power was still out then, and maybe Jeff can elaborate.
So, sorry, got a loud voice. To elaborate a little bit on that specific outage, it wasn't too long ago, right?
About 6 years ago.
Oh, well,
And then last year, we were out again for about 20 hours.
yeah, just for an, just as an example, for the most recent one on Goldenrod that we had, one of our service cables that comes from the pole to the east of you, over toward the Marrakesh area, had failed underground, feeding a first transformer in the radial that feeds, because Goldenrod's kind of split up already. It's split up, I think, overhead on one side and underground on the other, maybe. I think that's what it is.
Okay, let's move on to.
Anyway, there's a lot of different reasons why we have to isolate things. We usually isolate it to the problem area.
Okay.
Usually the people directly affected are out for a period of time just until we can fix it while everybody else is up and running. It's just one of those things. It just depends on where the fault occurs and
Thank
we have
you.
to address it.
Thank you. Who's next? Right there, sir. We'll get you a microphone so everybody can hear you. And I'm sorry to be the cruel teacher here, but I'm trying to just move things along and make sure everybody has a chance to ask and at least be heard, and hopefully there'll be more opportunities. So I apologize for the strict timekeeping here. Please.
Thank you. My name is Vince Carlin of South Palm Desert. I had a question with respect to the districts. It sounds like there's a lot of leeway as far as self-selection, or you can kind of form your own districts. Certainly, there's got to be some type of parameters. Could you elaborate a little bit on what that looks like?
Yes, and David, you want to take this, or? I think you're talking about our policy that now allows you to designate the neighborhood instead of just going to a strict district, and there's a 600-foot minimum and so forth. So our city manager, John Walmuth.
I'll take the question. John Walmuth, City Manager, City of Palm Desert. The initially in 2000, we identified areas in the city that we thought were contiguous districts and that would be cost-effective to underground. What we didn't realize back in 2000 was that we were limiting the residents, the homeowners, the property owners' ability to set up a district with maybe one street or two streets instead of an eighth of the city. So we adjusted our policy to allow the residents to determine an area, and then we work with Edison to test that area to see if it's cost efficient, cost effective, and has economies of scale built in. Because as David mentioned, if you're undergrounding a